So yeah, welcome to Storycraft Conversations. This is a series of author interviews. It's designed for readers and for writers who want to improve their craft. I'm Claire Mulligan. I'm a author, writer, creative writing instructor, editor. And my co-host and co-creator for this author interview series is April Bosshard. She's an author and editor and story consultant at Deep Story Design. And April and I are going to be taking turns interviewing authors across different genres. So thank you for joining us tonight for our conversation with multi-talented, multi-award winning author Caroline Adderson. This interview is being offered from Vancouver Island from the city of Colwood that rests on the traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and the Wipsan nations. So I'm going to begin with a little introduction to Caroline's very impressive body of work. And we're going to do a quick little slideshow. Let me just pull up my screen. There we go. So Caroline, her career began with short fiction, and she's published 3 collections. Her first, Bad Imaginings, was a Governor General Award nominee and a winner of the Ethel Wilson Award, also known as the BC Book Prize. She followed that debut with Pleased to Meet You, and her latest collection of short stories is the Giller Prize nominated A Way to Be Happy. Her short stories have appeared in over 19 anthologies worldwide. Caroline is also the author of 5 internationally published and highly critically acclaimed novels. Her novels have been twice nominated for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, longlisted for the International Impact Dublin Literary Award. She has also been a finalist for the Rogers Trust Fiction Prize and earned another nomination and win for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize for Sitting Practice. She's also done nonfiction, most notably for Vancouver Vanishes. This is an amazing book. It's a collection of essays and photographs about the loss of Vancouver heritage homes. I just read this book and I don't know, I had a tear in my eye. I lived in Vancouver for years, and it's just a really interesting book. She's also done a lot of books for young readers. I think about 33, Caroline, is that in there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
possibly, maybe more.
She's written extensively for young readers, including Very Serious Children, the Bruno series, the Jasper John Dooley series, Izzy series. She's won the Sheila A. Egoff Children's Literature Prize, shortlisted for the CLA Book of the Year Award, and more. This is a quote from The Sky is Falling, which I love. The miracle of literature is that the more particular the story, the more universal. Caroline is also a 3-time winner for the CBC Literary Awards, has been longlisted for the International Sunday Times Short Story Award, and won National Award Magazine Award Gold Medal for fiction. And you're currently teaching, are you still writing and publishing at Simon Fraser?
Yes, I'm in the writing and publishing program at SFU, and I also am the Vancouver mentor for the Shoe Project.
What's the Shoe Project?
It's a program where a writer works with a group of immigrant and refugee women and kind of leads them through crafting a story about their lives centered around a pair of shoes. And then they go on to work with voice and movement coaches, and they put on a public performance. So we do ours at the Arts Club Theatre, generally have 2 sold out shows. It's just a wonderful, wonderful program. I love it.
That sounds amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to be focusing on her body of work, but more particularly her latest collection of short stories, A Way to Be Happy. It's been very beautifully reviewed. It was nominated. There it is, as I said, for the for the Giller Prize. The Independent says a prose style as elegant and controlled as a swallow dive, which I gotta say, that's a really nice that's a really nice phrase in itself. Its clarity is so overwhelming that it becomes intoxicating, from the Globe and Mail. The New York Times Book Review says that all of Adderson's characters have utility, not simply as plot devices, but as a part of a striving, suffering whole. And then Toronto Star says Adderson excels at portraying life in all its glorious, devastating messiness. Okay, let me get to some questions.
Thank you, Clara. That's lovely.
So after I read this collection, you know what I did? I went back and I picked up, I read this collection and then I reread Bad Imaginings and some of your other works. But Bad Imaginings was easy to read because it was on my shelf. There it is. It was on my bookshelf, and I realized I've had this book on my shelf since the 90s. And it's come with me from Vancouver to Whistler to the States and for 10 years came back, and every time every time you move, you pack things up and you decide which one books to keep, and that one's been kept in my boxes. And I think it's because I like to have on the shelf books that I can learn from, books that I feel like not just as inspiring, but there's something about them, and you just remember them, right? You just remember them, and you can go back in them and learn. And it's kind of like having that sort of the writer, the author as a mentor. So this brings me to my first question. In the epigraph in A Way to Be Happy, you quote Anton Chekhov's play Uncle Vanya, and the quote reads, "People 100 years or 200 years from now who despise us for having lived such stupid and tasteless lives, perhaps they'll find a way to be happy. As for us, there's only one hope for you and me, the hope that when we're asleep in our graves, visions might visit us, perhaps even unpleasant ones." Did I do that?
Pleasant.
Pleasant ones, perhaps even pleasant ones. I was like, I thought that can't be right. Um, but Chekhov also looms large in The Sky is Falling,
Mhm.
and of course, The Russian Sister, which is your wonderful historical novel that centers on Chekhov's sister, Masha. Uh,
Mhm.
so I
He
guess,
also comes up in Ellen in Pieces. There's a story in Ellen in Pieces where she's reading Lady with the Lapdog when she adopts her dog. Yeah, yeah. I have a bad, bad crush. And I thought when I wrote A Russian Sister, I would be over him. But
you
then
did.
look what happened. He creeps back in. He crept back in here. Yeah.
That's amazing. So would you describe him as kind of a muse or a mentor for you?
Yeah, definitely. He definitely would. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I go back again and again to his stories. Been reading them all my life.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely up there for me.
Yeah, yeah, I see that sort of influence in your work. It's very there's the realism, but I think unlike Chekhov, there's often sort of a sense of magic to them. Not magic, but a sort of a strangeness you can't put your finger on, right?
Hmm.
Whereas I mean, Chekhov had that sometimes, but not to the same degree. Uh, do you think it's really important for writers to sort of find a couple of great classic writers in particular, or contemporary writers, to
Hmm.
to really study and sort of have as their kind of their backbone or their mentor, I suppose?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You can't be a writer if you don't read and I'm a self-taught writer. I don't have an MFA. I don't even have a BA. I have a B.Ed. And so I actually taught myself to write by writing and by reading.
Mhm.
And if you can find a model and learn from inside, then that's
Mhm.
that's what's going to educate you more than any creative writing teacher, I think. And that goes on through your whole career. Whenever I'm stuck, I can't figure something out. I feel kind of blah in my language.
Mhm.
I just go to my bookshelf and that's where I find my solutions.
Wow. Besides Chekhov, is there other writers you would recommend as particularly
Well,
for short story writers?
yeah, in the short story form, definitely uh, Alice Munro, Mavis Gallant,
Mhm.
um, a whole long list. I wish you'd put this in the questions and I would have been prepared, but
No, sorry.
if you look at
I just
my
didn't want to.
on my website, I have a list of all the books I've ever read, and you'll see a whole list on them of them there.
Okay. So Chekhov, what draws you to his work in particular? Like what is it
Well,
about his?
yeah, there are a few things for me. One is the tone. I feel like he writes the way I feel, which is his stories are very, very funny. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, they're extremely sad, and
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's life, except when it's completely calamitous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And it's also the kind of fiction that I'm drawn to writing. So most of the things I write, if I said, "Oh yes, I'm writing a book about a novel about spinal cord injury,"
Mhm.
everybody rears back, or the Holocaust, or the fear of nuclear war. These
Yeah.
are like pretty dark subjects, but the treatment of them is quite funny, and I feel that it goes across the surface light, but
Hmm.
goes
Hmm.
down deep. So he does that for me. The other thing is his credo for writing. His he said that he writes things as they are. So
Yeah.
unlike so many writers of his period and our period too, but more especially then because modern writers learned from him, he
Mhm.
has no moral. He's not judging his characters. He's not trying to teach the reader a lesson of any kind. And interestingly, last week, one of my students in my SFU course, she gave me an essay that she had read, which I'm really enjoying. And in the essay is a quote from Chekhov. So I thought I'd just share it here
Yes,
because it
please do. Yeah.
explains in better words what I'm talking about. So this is him writing in a letter to his publisher, Alexei Savorin.
Mhm.
And he says, "You abuse me for objectivity, calling it indifference to good and evil, lack of ideals, and so on. You would have me, when talking about horse thieves, say, stealing horses is an evil. But that has been known for ages without my saying so. Let the jury judge them. It's my job simply to show what sort of people they are." And I just love that. Uh, and so that segues right into his focus on the character. He presents us with this vast panoply of people, many of whom are deeply flawed, many very lovable, but lots of deeply flawed people. And we just watch the result of them making their deeply flawed choices and somehow love them anyway.
Mhm.
So that he's never jamming characters into a plot. He's
Mhm.
devised ahead of time. He it seems to me that he's following the people he creates, and that's really what I try to do in my writing as well. So on all those levels, that's what I've learned from him.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Um, I guess, yeah, the Russia's Sister. I mean, this is your novel about Chekhov's sister. I found that one just such a amazing piece of work, and I read it and I recommend it to everybody. I felt like, especially when we started getting into the plays, talking about the plays from of Chekhov, how revolutionary they were,
Mhm.
what they meant. Like, and I thought there's no better way than literature, I think, to learn about literature. Like for me, like I felt like I was right there along with it. And you actually went to Russia, right? To
Mhm. Mhm. I did. I went to Russia about 9 months after Crimea was annexed. So of
golly.
course, I'm very happy I now that I went,
Mm,
because who would go now? And it was really an interesting time to go because I did go to Crimea. I went to all the Chekhov sites. I
mm,
was really trying to figure out what novel I was writing,
mm,
and so I went to Crimea. I was the only Westerner to go there. And I know because the woman who ran the tour company personally came to meet me and said, "I had to see this brave Canadian." So I felt a little bad for her because, of course, all their business dropped off. But,
oh,
it's extraordinary to be um, in those sites, to be,
mm,
in the houses that he
mm,
lived in, and
mm,
all of them there, and every little town has a Chekhov street. It's amazing. Unlike us, who we tear everything down,
yeah.
everything is there, they're all museums. It's just his high school is a museum.
Oh my gosh.
Ordinary.
Could you have written the novel if you had not gone there?
I doubt it. I
Yeah,
doubt it.
not the
Yeah,
same. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I really have to. I mean, I say that, but I really do feel in my work that I have to uh, be in a place that I'm going to write about. So, obviously I can't be in the 19th century,
Mhm.
but because they have preserved so much, I felt really that I was. Um, and, I usually go places
Yeah,
that I write about.
yeah.
It's really just for the small details because those are what's so important. We think the big things are important, but it's actually the many, many small things that are
Yeah, the little details, absolutely. Yeah, that specificity. Um, I wanted to talk about this idea of grace. I was reading the book. The characters are very disparate, and the tone ranges from tragic to comic. But it struck me there's always this moment of grace, and to be honest, I'm not really sure what I mean by that or how I'm defining that. There's a few ways to define it. It's a bit ineffable. Like we kind of understand it, but it's you know what I mean. Like, and I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
I'm wondering if well, actually, I'll give two quotes that I thought illuminated this from the collection. In our old acquaintances are gone, you write, the dim world filled with lightness and brightness, with the tinkling of bells and with her own pure wish.
Mhm.
And in Ketman in the Procedure, which is a hilarious story, I love that story. His inclination had always been to not dig too deep, to stay in the topsoil far from life's profundities. His life, however, unexamined, satisfied him. Shelby the cat's business was good. Kenny might come around. So both to me are those. They're different, but they're very sort of ideas that there's sort of an enlightened moment for the characters in some way. Uh,
Mhm.
so do you think are these insightful moments of let's call them beats of grace pre-planned, or do they come to you when you write?
They come to me through the writing. Yeah,
Yeah.
always.
Okay.
They can't really be pre-planned. You don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, so I don't know what's going to be that transcendent moment.
Mhm.
Traditionally we would call this an epiphany, but
Tiffany, yeah.
yeah, so I looked it up, epiphany up, just to make sure that it was true. So that it does have a religious.
Yeah.
January 6th is the celebration of Epiphany, which is
Hmm.
technically when the Magi came to
Right.
baby Jesus, and but it's also considered to be a manifestation of a divine being. And in literature, I think you're right, it's a manifestation of something kind of a realization or a grasp, an intuitive grasp of reality and
Mhm.
illumination, and yeah.
Yeah, some kind of a connection, right? Like some
Hmm.
sort of a
Mhm.
connection to the greater whole or some sort of scratching at the surface of some sort of change. Do you think these sorts of beats, moments of grace, let's call them, or epiphanies, are crucial to the short story, like more so than the novel?
Well, I think they're in the novel too, but they're probably essential to a story because a story can be quite unplotted, and
Mhm.
every story, whether it's a novel or a short story, the character has to change.
Right.
And so those it seems to me those epiphanies are the biggest moments of change. And so without a moment of change, you don't really have a story, you have an
Mhm.
anecdote. So they are quite crucial.
Yeah, but I find that you do them very subtly, right?
Mm.
Because when we talk about change, in genre stories, there's often this, obvious change from one
Mhm.
state to the other. But I think in the short story, certainly the literary short story, it's often a lot more sort of, yeah, I
Mhm.
guess subtle, but still very profound. Right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I found that, and that's
Has
another.
to be suggested and more than pointed out. So,
Yeah, and I think this is where the use of language, right, comes in
mhm.
handy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in that quote you read from All Our Old Acquaintances Are Gone, which is a
Mhm.
story about a couple who are addicts who s- or on New Year's Eve infiltrate a series of high-end parties and in order to strip the wallets, and
Mhm.
they're actually funding their own recovery.
Mhm.
And so all the way through the drama that's happening between the couple is the guy really loves he loves going to the parties, and he's getting quite into the partying, and she just wants out of there and is terrified, um and so she keeps waiting to talk to him. They're supposed to be communicating by phone. So then this kind of mysterious thing happens to her, and that has to do with a baby. And
Mm.
so then she's waiting and waiting for him to say he's ready to go, and then you kind of forget about that.
Mm.
And then at the moment she's kind of having this moment,
Mm.
the phone, he finally contacts her on the phone. So what she hears, those bells, that's actually the phone ringing. So it,
Yeah.
it's multi-layered. It's done with, a practical thing and
Mhm.
and because it's bells, it takes this symbolic resonance and
Mhm. Yeah. No, it's a wonderful story. What was the hardest story to write in this collection, do you think?
oh, what was the hardest story to write? Well, I think the hardest story to write was um, obscure objects.
Oh, okay. Why was
Which
that?
is why it was so hard was it's actually been had a numerous iterations and been published 3 times before it
Hmm.
actually appeared in this book. And
Interesting.
every single time people would say to me, I didn't get it. So I hope now I finally got it. It's finally obvious what I was doing, but it was really funny.
Can
Uh,
you give us the
rather
gist of it?
press. Pardon me?
Can you give us a gist of it?
Well, it's the story of a young writer. It's the only story that's has the as I referred to in the story as the half dead rabbit of the pulled out of the hat of the writer protagonist. So
Mm.
she's trying to write a story about a friend who's telling her stories about some sexual adventures that she had had and kind of pushing the narrator to be herself. Why is she so tight and closed in? Um, and so, in order, the friend, of course, is married and has children and wants this to be her identity to be discreet. So she begins by changing, they decide she'd make her a different uh, ethnic group. And
Mm.
then, so the character begins to change. She alternates between being Jewish, being Chinese, and being Italian. And and then sometimes she has sons, sometimes she has daughters, and so it's hard to know by the in the story what she really is. It's never clear what she really is in the story, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I found it very clever, like in a very, yeah, you have to pay attention.
yes.
But I think that's what short stories are about. You do have to pay attention to
Mm.
short stories.
You have to pay attention.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
They're
kind of half doze in a novel.
yeah, I know you can okay,
Can't
get
see
to
it.
chapter,
Yeah.
skip to the end, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Or-
Yes. I have read novels where I've read the first sentence of every paragraph and seem to have completely understood them, but I wouldn't try that in a story.
No, no, because every single word counts, right?
Every single word counts. Yeah.
Every single word counts and matters and has meaning and is doing multiple purposes. Yeah. I'm gonna ask you a couple of true or false questions,
Okay.
right? The novel is a short story writ large. True or false?
False. I
Okay,
think
I'll
they're
get back to that.
entirely, I think they're entirely different forms in my
Yeah.
in fact, when I went through the hell of writing my first novel,
Mm.
my epiphany was when I realized, oh, oh, I get it. A novel is not a long, long, long short story, and it took me about 3 years to figure that out. So now,
Mhm.
this great wisdom that I have now after toiling in the trenches for so long, I see them as completely different. So I would say one family is the dramatic form,
Mhm.
and that includes screenwriting, playwriting, and novels. And the other is the poetic form, which is short stories and poetry. And now there's a lot of overlap in the
Mhm.
way that you write them, but I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
y- um, a novel is, especially a long one, it
Mhm.
is dramatized. It's written in scenes.
Mhm.
It has causal relationship from scenes to scene. But you can have a short story where there's no causality and it's all
Mhm.
imagistic,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
still a story.
And it's still a
But
story. Yeah.
yes, and you could write a novel like that, but they're tough. They're tough. Yeah.
Exactly right. You can certainly be a lot more experimental with a short story. You can try things that maybe
Mhm.
could
Mhm.
be sustained in a novel and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the purposes of if our audience is largely uh, uh, writers trying to improve their craft, that's that's what of course, there are many, many exceptions, but I would say if you're struggling with your first novel, you came to the right place. You just got the piece of information you need to to finish that devil there.
Okay, so here's another true or false. The short story is a lesser relative to the novel.
False. Yes, I think it's higher.
It is
I think it's
higher.
higher. I think it's a higher form. A novel requires stamina,
Yeah,
right? You have to say, I'm going to spend 3 years
yeah.
plus. I usually spend, it would take me, usually takes me 2 years to write a first draft, and then you have another 2 years or more doing all the subsequent
Yeah.
drafts of your wretched first draft. Uh, 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 so that takes a lot of time and effort, and there's effort in trying to see the whole thing and hold it all in your head, all those kinds of things. But a short story, I mean, it's every word, every sentence, everything is minutely put together, and drafts, change things around. It's on, for me, it's on the sentence level. It's like the sentences and the rhythm of the sentences and the words you're using are are as much uh propelling the story as whatever plot you have in that story. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is my opinion. This is my opinion, right? You asked me here to talk, so it's my opinion. You may
I
have.
would agree. I would agree. They're little, they strike me, sort of stories strike me as little kind of jewels, I suppose. And, they have to be polished and polished
Mhm,
and aren't necessarily easy to define.
mhm,
They don't
mhm.
have as many rules. I mean, one of the reasons I like screenwriting, I know you've probably done some screenwriting too, is that it's kind of a relief sometimes to be told, no, you have to follow these rules. You need
Yes, yes,
X, Y,
yeah.
Z. No, you can't do
So,
this. This is the structure. This is the act break. This is this. This is this. I'm like, okay, great. Give me that sandbox. But it's a different, completely different way of thinking and creating. I find though.
definitely. For me, it's totally different. It's different.
Switch your
Yeah,
hats.
different hat. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So I guess this kind of answers the same question, but writers are best advised to write short stories before they attempt a novel. True or false?
Bing. False yet again. Well, yet
Really?
again.
Okay.
In my opinion, I don't think writing short stories is going to help you write a novel. What it will do is, if you write a publishable short story and get it published,
Mm-hmm.
you will have a publication record
Yeah.
that when you submit your novel, you could say, my stories have been published here, here, here,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's how it will be helpful. But again, because they're not the same form really,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it as a lead up or a practice to writing a novel. I see it as its own thing.
It's its own thing. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. And yeah, it is important to build up, yeah, sometimes to certainly to
Yes. Yeah.
catch
Yeah.
the eye, to get grants. My first grant I got with just having whatever the required amount of short stories published. From
Exactly. Yeah.
council.
That's
And I
what
said,
it's good. Yeah.
I think they still do that, where you can, instead of having a first novel published, you can have a bunch of short stories published, probably six
Yeah.
or something like that.
Probably. Yeah.
Something like that, which is great. So you write many different kinds, just segueing to that. You write novels, you write nonfiction, and you write a lot of children's stories.
Hmm.
I find that so interesting. I read a few of them. What happened on Sweet Street? That was charming.
Yeah.
Pictures are so bonkers in that one.
Yes. Yes. You should see one version of it, an earlier version. When I saw them, it was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Like Stefan Jorish, who's the illustrator for that. He is a genius. He's won the Governor General's Award for
Mm.
illustration numerous times. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, okay, here's the difference between an artist and an illustrator. He just
Okay, okay.
take, takes it to a whole different level. But at one point, I said, oh, so looking at I said to the editor, looking at the sketches, I said, oh, so we're going to have a dominatrix in this book. She is with her,
Yeah,
her
yeah, yeah.
fishnet stockings and her whip, and that was one of the cooks in the book. So anyway, that was toned down a bit, but I thought it was funny. But
Oh, that's hilarious. Actually, I have it
yeah,
here. Let me see if I can. This, if anyone has grandkids or kids, this is
Yeah,
a
yeah,
charming book, and you can see
yeah.
his kind of oddball illustrations. The way the people are, they're very kind of, I don't know.
Yes, there she is. There she is. Yes.
Is that the
That
one? The yeah,
yes, that's her. And the other,
yeah,
just shift it over a little bit, you'll see her there, there.
yeah.
She's got a magic wand. I think she had a whip before.
Oh, don't let the down south people
Yeah.
see those. That's a
Hmm.
little bit creepy. But yeah, I found
Not
it
that I pointed it out. Yeah.
like the whole like the pictures there. But kids love that. They love these sort of odd,
I
like
do.
outside
Yeah.
that regular imagination. I think that's right. So, what's the most important thing you've learned as a writer from writing children's stories?
You must have an active protagonist.
Ah,
So writing for kids is a genre. So like you said, there's some comfort in having rules, and there are many, many rules for writing for children, which I had to learn through trial and error. But the big one is the child in the story, the child protagonist, who can be an actual child or is sometimes a squirrel or a teddy bear. That protagonist has to solve the problem by themselves. They can't have an adult solve the problem for them. That's like enormously disempowering for children who have spent their lives having adults telling them what to do and solving all their problems. Um, and when I figured that out, I thought, oh, this is the problem with my writing. I, I feel like many writers, because you're in your head and you're seeing things in your head, you choose your protagonist as a watcher. And I felt like up until the point I made that realization, that I tended to have protagonists who were the least interesting people in the book. They were surrounded by really colorful characters. Um, and then as soon as I realized that, like this door in my head
yeah.
kicked in, and there stood Ellen McGinty from Ellen in Pieces, who screws up her own life and then fixes it herself. Yeah, so it was a big thing. I think it really has helped my adult writing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that um, you actually can actually earn a much better living writing for children than you can writing for adults. That's the other thing. So that has been a big part of how I've financed my career, such as it is. It's been writing for children. Not that I'm making millions or anything, but you actually get checks, unlike writing for adults, where the checks, I mean, royalty checks, you earn out
Yeah.
your small advances, but even those small advances are kind of the same advance that you'd get for a novel these days. So, mm,
Yeah. Right?
yeah.
So what was your first children's book that you wrote?
My first children's book was a little book called I, Bruno, that came out with Orca.
Okay.
Came out, I think, in 2007. I wrote that the summer my son turned 5. I'd been reading stories to him his whole life. And quite often I'd think, this is terrible. And yet I'd read it to him. It never occurred to me to write for children myself. I just saw myself as an adult author, an author for adults.
Mm.
And then when he was 5, this one summer, we'd go out and something would happen, and I'd come home and think that was just like a story. So I decided I would write these little stories out based on things that happened to us, and then he could read them when he was an adult.
Mhm.
And then I thought they were pretty good, and I said to him, "I've written these stories. Would you like me to read them to you?" And he said, "Are there pictures?" I said, "No." Oh, well, you can read them to me when there are pictures. So I had to get some pictures. So then I gave them to my agent, and not knowing what a picture book was, I actually had her submitted around as picture books, but they weren't picture books. I know that now. And but so eventually Orca, who's a really great kids publisher in Victoria, they picked them up and actually asked me to write a second. So there's two of those Bruno books. And so that book that was published in 2007 and sells for uh, 7.99, I think.
Yeah.
I still get checks.
Wow.
I still get checks twice a year.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm just saying this is what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. They're not huge checks.
Yeah.
And they're mainly from licensing.
Mhm.
So like educational institutions license the book through tumbleweeds, and
Yeah.
that's where most of the money is coming from.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's nice
It's
to have
wonderful.
a young boy protagonist because it's there's
Yeah.
sometimes a dearth or books that are realistic of what children actually
Yes.
face,
Yes.
things like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'd be very helpful too with writing for children for working on clarity of language and
Hmm.
meaning. I know some
Yes.
of the students in my class, I get them to write like you're speaking to a 10-year-old, right? Because it
Yes.
really
Yeah.
forces you, and then can embellish afterwards because I think we can get
Yes. Yeah. Sure. That sounds
sometimes
good exercise.
emptiness. But when you write for children, you realize you have to just say what you mean, but of course you still have to be poetic, right? Because children's
Mm-hmm.
stories are poems as well. They have
Hmm.
poetic sensibility. Certainly, like what happened on Sweet Street is a lovely like poem, really.
Hmm.
The way it
Hmm.
flows and stuff, and
Yeah.
that's younger readers, right? Because there's picture books and then first chapter books and then middle grade and then
Right. Yes. There's all this. So a picture book, you have all kinds of leeway in terms of language, because usually, quite often, there's an adult intermediary. So,
yeah.
and I see that as an opportunity
Mhm.
for children to be introduced to actual words and
Mhm.
even languages that they don't speak, because
Mhm.
there's an adult interfacing with them over the story. So that book, It Happened on Sweet Street, is full of French.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and so
yeah.
there's French words and that they will understand in the context, and that can be explained to them. And now they're developing an ear for different languages. Oh, okay, not everything's English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the best parts of raising children with the books.
Mhm.
Not the TV shows; those are horrible. So, let's go back to short story collections. On collections, I think writers of short stories are often encouraged to sort of create a collection, define it by theme, or to create linked short stories, or by setting, or by genre, sort of stuff. So it's a little neat little package. But yours are always very disparate. The stories
Mhm.
within your collections are very little different. Is that how do you approach a collection? Do you approach it with having diverse stories, or do you matter, or is it? I just wonder if you could speak.
Well, I think what you say, like in terms of starting your career with a book of short stories, publishers these days would definitely like look for, and you're going to have some description of the book, and if you can find some through line to make it seem coherent. But I have never done that, and I've always found that in fact the complete madcap diversity of the stories is what has made them more appreciated.
Mhm.
So yeah, I remember when I wrote Bad Imaginings, and I thought, oh, nothing, all the stories are so different. Everybody will hate them. Instead, it was, wow, look at all the voices, look at all the different kinds of stories in the book. And that carried on. That just,
Mhm.
people have always said that, but I don't, I mean, I published that book in 1993. So things are a lot harder now, and probably finding that hook. But it can be a completely, you know, uh, I don't want to say arbitrary, but so one of the reasons that Chekhov epigraph is in the book, and the book is called A Way to Be Happy, was, we're going on and on trying to figure out what the title would be.
Mhm.
And there's a story in the book called Yolki Palki, and it's about a Russian hitman. And so a lot of things came together in that story. And so there's a character in the story, he's remembering, the hitman is remembering this old woman who was in his childhood, and he's totally forgotten her, and she's starting to come back to him, and he remembers her muttering these things, which are in fact those lines.
Mhm.
uh, and so originally called that story A Way to Be Happy, and then I changed it to Yolki Palki, which is a better title for the story.
Mhm.
And so when I was trying to title the whole collection, I thought, oh, I'll call it A Way to Be Happy.
Yeah.
And my editor said, oh, you can't do that. They'll shelve it in the self-help section, to which I said, yay, maybe I'll buy it. But and now in all the reviews, people say, they wrote in it, this story collection explores the different ways we look for happiness, and they talk about it as if I consciously set out to write a book about finding happiness, which I didn't. I just slapped that title on it, and because in a way, that's all anybody's trying to do. We're all trying to be happy. So I just thought, well, it fits, so I'll put it on there.
Yeah.
But you can see that people love that you have some umbrella or some hook that you can attach to the story collection. Just helps in terms of sales and in terms of attracting a publisher.
Yeah.
So I say, just make it up. You don't have this, you can just make it up. Um, that being said, I really like linked short stories as well. I really do
Yeah,
love.
absolutely. Yeah. 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 There's a place that
Ellen in Pieces was my kind of what I wasn't exactly trying to do linked short stories. What I was actually trying to do was write a novel in stories, like a real novel in stories, where actually there's two versions of the book that exists. The first version is 12 stories, 12 independent standalone short stories,
Mhm.
and four of those were published as short stories.
Mhm.
And then I smooshed them together and called it a novel. But, in the end, it turned out that there was too much repetition
Mhm.
because every time you write a short story, you have to set the world up. So the world was set up again and again and again. It got very repetitious.
Mhm.
So in subsequent drafts, I took out all the repetition. So now if you open the book and read it,
Mhm.
randomly at a story, it won't be a standalone story anymore, but that's
Mhm.
what I was aiming for when I was first writing. But I hope so now to me it's an actual novel, but a very loose novel. So it's not really like a regular,
Yeah.
like if you read A Russian Sister, that's a novel. I was trying to write a 19th century novel, and Ellen in Pieces is more loosely connected, multiple points of view
Yeah.
shining on the same person.
Yeah. Well, hence the title, right? Where it really speaks to that.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so cool. Um, so on the historical short story, it's one of my favorite forms, and often these historical short stories you see they end up being quite kind of longer. They're sort of their own genre in a way. I think they've been called the deep short stories. Andrea Barrett, of course, from Ship Fever was a one of the ones who really brought it to the fore. But I think with Bad Imaginings, there's a couple of historical short stories in there, and I think maybe that was the first time I ever read this kind of thing or read it to the degree where I was like, wow, that seems new or seems
Mm,
something's
yeah.
going on here, right? In A Way to Be Happy, we have the wonderful story at the end, the from the archives of the Hospital of the Insane, and it was just an amazing story, and I could
Thanks.
see it's conjure it all up right now, even as we're talking. Can you tell us more about that? How you came to
Yeah,
write that?
yeah. So I was going to write a totally different story,
Mhm.
and but that was set in a 19th century hospital. So I Googled 19th century hospital, and out up popped, probably because of the algorithm, they
Mhm.
know where I live.
Mhm.
I were these three academic papers that were written in the 1990s by um, a professor. She teaches at SFU now, if she's not retired. So, and she wrote these three papers that was about a particular period from 1905 to 1915 under the tenure of uh, an administrator, a particular administrator of the Hospital for the Insane. It was about the lives of women in the hospital at that time. So at that time,
Mhm.
uh, it was just the start. Well, maybe it was, they were starting to leave the idea that, everything was hysterical,
Mhm.
and if a woman was insane, she should have her, uterus removed. So that kind of surgical means to treat uh, psychiatric problems had fallen out of favor and in favor of something just as bad, which was that everything is inherited,
No.
and which, later on led to eugenics. This was the start of eugenics. So, what was really crushing reading these
Mhm.
testimonies in these articles was these women, so they'd be institutionalized for these horrifying things that were going on in their lives, but like that didn't, it was never the circumstances around their lives that
Yeah.
caused problems. It's because those were just triggers to hereditary disposition to these problems. And it was just weird. So
Mm,
then they end up in the hospital, and they run the place. There's no treatment.
yeah.
They only started actual treatments after the First World War, and it was with what we would call now PTSD, but then it was shell shock. So all these men coming back from the World War with shell shock, and they would do all kinds of awful things like plunge them in cold baths and things like that. But before that, they basically, it was believed it was hereditary. You couldn't do anything about it, and best you just work. You just keep busy and keep working, and so you can run the hospital. So the women did everything in the hospital. So I just thought this was amazing. These stories were so heartbreaking. So I applied to go and see the archives myself. Since this was more than 100 years, I could get access, but I still needed court permission. So I put in an application and I got it. And then I spent a week in 5 days in Victoria going through these patient files. And they were so much more than the medical records. Like they were full of letters from the families and realia. Like there was a little envelope, and I opened it up, and there was a little piece of handmade lace that someone had sent the patient. And one thing I figured out pretty quickly was if I opened the file and there's a photograph, the 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 woman had died in the hospital. And so I'd open up and right away see, oh, she died. And then I could look through and see how long she'd been there and what she died of. And there were court transcripts, and yeah, it was amazing. So that story that I built up from that, one of the storylines, there's two storylines that kind of weave back and forth. They're all based on those stories I read. So I kind of conflated some of the characters and added, but the one storyline is about a character called Lucy,
Mhm.
and that's a true story.
Is it?
Yes, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want to give it away because you guys will be.
Yes. Yes.
But
So,
Lucy, she's my hero.
yeah, she was wonderful. Yeah, it's a true story.
And the
Yeah.
one about the baby too, the one who thought she
That's the one that I made up. Yeah.
that was yeah,
Yeah.
that gave me nightmares.
But
Um,
then the different women who were in the there were women in the hospital for those very reasons that are listed in the I
yeah,
had to change their names. I had to change their patient numbers for
mhm,
reasons of confidentiality.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So if any of you have a relative who was in the Provincial Hospital for the Insane in 1908, and your relative was named Lucy, contact me.
yeah.
Because I'm not allowed to say what her real name is, but of course I know what it is. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. So you said something about 100 years. So you're not allowed. Are you allowed if things are more
I
than 100?
believe that's it. Normally these files would be, if I wanted to look up files from 30 years ago, I couldn't. You
Okay.
can't access that. It has to be a family member or the actual person in the file, but they're closed to the public for good reason. You can't be looking at people's, say, psychiatric records or
Yeah,
health records of any
yeah.
kind.
As
Yeah.
long as it's 100 years ago, right?
Yes, I think that was the rule. There was some reason. It might even have
Yeah.
been. Yeah.
It sounds about. I did that. I remember doing this for Boston Gym and going to the archives, and that was one of the more fun. That was just amazing,
Yeah. It's
right?
really
Finding the
interesting.
old letters, reading
Yeah.
them, feeling them, that sense,
Yeah.
just touching the past and their spidery writing. You can even, and just yeah, just I thought it was fascinating. Um, you have what time are we at? I think we have time for a. Can you read a? Do you want? Can you do a quick reading for us?
Sure. Sure.
Questions.
We were, I thought since we talked about that story that I would read a little passage so you get a sense of who the Lucy story.
Mhm.
Um, so so Margaret is 51 and she is lame. Um, and so she does all the mending in the hospital, or a lot of the mending in the hospital. They also have a tailoring room where they would sew the costumes, but she mends everything. You can look up this is actually publicly available to anyone. You can look up these hospital. The provincial government every year would put a report from this hospital, and you can see like they have a list of all the work that they did and all the items that they mended, and it's astonishing. And the nationalities of everybody and why they were there. All these reports are there. Anyway, she is kind of sticks to the room because she has difficulty walking, and you don't find out until the end what why she's actually in the hospital. But I will tell you now, since you'll find out at the end anyways, that she's some things happened to her, and she ended up converting to Swedenborgianism, which is still around. People who they had a big belief in angels and what heaven was like, and so you'll hear a little bit about that. And so Lucy is the person who's based on a real character, and she was 15 years old when she ended up in a hospital. Margaret did not visit heaven in her dreams that night, for she didn't dream. She lay awake thinking about that other troubled girl, Lucy L. Sturdy, freckle spattered, coal scuttle for a mouth. Though expelled from a convent orphanage somewhere in the interior, she adamantly denied a lack of kin. She'd seen her parents' wedding picture held for safe keeping, just as Lucy herself had been kept safe after her mother died, birthing her. Her father, a blacksmith, moved on to look for work, but he was going to come back for her, probably when she turned 18. Satan is that father's child, the day attendant at the time told Matron Fillmore loud enough for everyone to hear. Lucy was put to work like everyone, first to the kitchen where she spat in the food, then the laundry where she punched Augusta for her silly talk. Uproar followed her. Sewing might keep her from the restraining chair. You have to sit still to sew, Matron told Margaret. How are you going to get her to do that? Margaret asked to try. And so Lucy stayed behind with Margaret after the room had been scrubbed and the others had left. Come close, Margaret told her. Careful, the floor's wet. Lucy lifted her skirts to her knees, took 2 running steps, and with a laugh slid over to the window and plunked herself down at the end of Julia's bed. The lesson began. Didn't the nuns teach you needlework? Margaret soon had to ask, for even a simple running stitch daunted the girl, her seam as crooked as her mouth and peppered from fingerprints, each of which had prompted a carillon of shrill screams. I stabbed an ass-faced boy I hated and didn't have to after that. Though often seized by the same compulsion, Margaret tutted. Lucy raised her eyebrows and leaned in. That was one of the nicer things I did. But I didn't know they'd bloody ship me here, did I? Where'll they send me after this place? Margaret pointed out the window toward the squat octagon behind Lawn House. See that tower? That's the isolation annex. Lucy slumped over her work. I'll be buggered if I'm stuck in this stink hole for years. Be nice and behave. It will keep you in good stead, and not just for now, through eternity, too. What's that supposed to mean? She told Lucy then of the world on the other side, where the angels lived just like them, in angel houses, in angel towns and cities with streets and parks, almost the same as our world, except everything was beautiful and good. They busied themselves all day doing God's work. What kind of work? Lucy asked, sucking a finger. What each is best at. Some raise children who have crossed over. Some help the ones just waking from death. Lucy perked up momentarily, perhaps thinking of her dead mother. But then she grumbled. Work, work, work. Sounds like here. If it is, I'll be buggered if I'm going. Don't say that. Think what you're suited for. Vaudeville. This flummoxed Margaret. Vaudeville wasn't mentioned in the track the new church woman on the streetcar gave her. Lucy, meanwhile, began an animated recounting of the time she'd escaped the convent and snuck into a show in town. The bag-punching sisters impressed her most. She leapt up and, fists swinging, galumphed about with a huge freckled grin, while Margaret laughed and laughed. That's what I want to do. Or work at Woodward's, dressed up all pretty. Do they have department stores? Again, Margaret hesitated. If you had everything you needed, what use would stores be? She seized on the dresses. On the other side, you wear garments according to your inner state. They might be different colors or the purest white. Lucy's brows, which were continually dancing about on her face, giving away her every mood, grew still. Do you get to choose? I'd die for a yellow dress. You choose how to behave. Then maybe one day you'll be invited to join those inmost in heaven. They're dressed in radiant light because, like Adam and Eve in Eden, they're innocent. You mean they're naked? Guffaws from Lucy. She stuck out her apron front and shimmied her shoulders in an unchildlike way, mimicking the vaudeville show she'd seen, or so Margaret hoped. Don't think of the body that way. Even here, your body clothes your spirit. That's what it's for. Lucy was still snickering, but after a moment her face ironed out. Your heaven sounds a bloody lot nicer than what those fire and brimstone sisters said. Bunch of cows. Bugger them. What Lucy said next made Margaret quail. If I can't get out of here, maybe I'll go straight to that angel place.
That was lovely. Awesome. I just feel like Lucy just, they both do, right? And this sense of their different beliefs and the very disparate nature of their characters, and they're pushed in together, and yeah. And Lucy's real, hey?
She's real. What happened to her is real, too. What happens to her in the
We're
story.
rooting for her. That's for sure. Okay, we're almost at 7. So let's we can get to the Q&A. Should we How should we do this, April?
I'll just jump on here with you guys. I've been collecting
Okay.
a few questions.
Can I leave
Yeah.
you ask? Do you want to ask?
Yeah, I'll ask some and then we can open up after. Well, I just want to say to Caroline, I love the collection,
Thank you.
especially
Thanks
that
so
story
much.
you just read from. Everybody should go out and get their copy. It's wonderful. Each story is so unique. So thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
So I
Thanks.
had my own set of questions sort of brewing, but I'm going to put those aside for now and go back to the ones that people were asking while listening to you. There are a couple questions that are actually about Russia, and then there's some about the stories and some about the craft of writing. So I'll start with the location ones.
Mhm.
So Diana asked earlier, she says, did Caroline go to Russia in the winter? The Russian sister includes very vibrant winter scenes and descriptions, fur and slushy.
No, it was not winter. It was September. In fact, can you imagine this? On my 45th birthday, I was standing on the Yalta Promenade with a copy of Lady with a Lapdog, which takes place on the Yalta Promenade. So it was September, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
There we go. The mystery is solved. So where did you get your ideas for winter then? Was that just being in Canada?
Oh,
Gave you enough
well,
experience?
well, I grew up in Alberta, but so there's that. But the other thing is, with that book, I created Russia by reading Chekhov. So I read Chekhov, and I would read, and I made careful notes. What food did they eat? What was the weather like? So little details I'd find, and I'll think, oh, that's interesting. So there's this difference between writing historically and reading a book that's written in a different period. So you'll see that if you read Chekhov, he doesn't explain all these things because everybody knew what those things were. So they're just there. And so I'd read along, and there was like one moment where a character goes and unbuttons the sledge cover. And I thought, oh, I guess that means, of course, if it's like an open sleigh and it's snowing, it'll get filled with snow. So they obviously have some cover over it. So then I had a character go out to unbutton the sledge cover. So, so I just found the details and I wove all the way through. I built the world by actually using the very same details in Chekhov. So I didn't use the same words, but I found, so he has a lot of winter scenes. So I would read the winter scenes and see, okay, he's got the wind, he's got this, he's got here are the drifts. And then that's how I built that. And also my own remembrances of growing up in a hideously frozen climate. Yeah.
Thank you. That's fascinating. We can research in the stories themselves, not
Yes,
just
yes,
actual
yeah,
historical records. That's awesome.
yes, yes.
Um, Roberta asks if you could please talk about Chekhov's experiences in the Sakhalin Island.
Sakhalin Island, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I pronounced that right. You touched on this topic in The Russian Sister, but I wanted to know more.
Yes. So Chekhov wrote a book called Sakhalin Island, which is considered one of the greatest examples of literary journalism. So you wouldn't have thought of that. You don't think of him as being a literary journalist, but he was. So Sakhalin Island was a penal colony, and at the time that when Chekhov went there, there were no trains there. So it was like a very arduous journey. The first half of the book is more like a travelogue of him traveling to Sakhalin Island. So this is where prisoners, who might be there, for stealing bread, or some of them were terrible murderers. All kinds of people would end up there, and they could never leave. So they were
Wow.
basically, if you were sent there, you could go to other parts of Siberia, but you basically could never go back to, if you were from Moscow or St. Petersburg, you could never come home again. You were just exiled for life. And so he was the first person, other than someone involved in the penal colony, to actually go there. And he did a census. He spoke to every single prisoner who was there on Sakhalin Island. So they had, like, sometimes they were in barracks, and sometimes the prisoners were servants for the penal colony, the guards and the administrators and things like that. So he interviewed everyone and talked to everybody and did this vast census. And he reported, one thing that's in the book is he reported on, like, he witnessed a flogging. It's just horrific, absolutely horrific. And it took a huge toll on his health. I mean, he had tuberculosis and probably hastened his life. He died at 43, and it was incredible that he had done this. So because he was a medical doctor too, and a great interest in science, that wasn't his for only census he did either. He throughout his life did other censuses, um, like on a volunteer basis, because he believed that was how you had to keep track of people and know how a community was thriving. He's an extraordinary person. Very, yeah, very, yeah, not as saintly as we used to think. If you read my book, you'll find out, but saintly in many ways.
I think you're passing on your crush for him to
Yeah, yeah.
all of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't read any of this. You'll never get it. You'll never get your heart back. You'll be.
Well, yeah. Well, start small. Start with this one.
Yeah,
Start with The
yes.
Russian Sister and see where it takes you. But thank you for that passion about him as your inspiration. I'm just going to ask a few of the questions about the craft, if that's okay, because I think it'll be really interesting to people. Although this is a bit of a bridge question. Amandeep asked, hi, Caroline, I'm just wondering, was there a particular story in the collection that was the most personal or challenging for you to write, and why?
Oh, in this A Way to Be Happy. Yeah. So I mentioned the one earlier.
Obscure objects.
Obscure objects, yeah, which was tricky for that reason. But they're all so different, so they all present their own technical problems. Yeah, and their own kind of research. So I mentioned the research that I did for the hospital story, but for
Yeah.
old acquaintances,
Mm.
you know, I spent a day and I just went down to the downtown east side and I just walked up and down every street and talked to people and watched people and tried to get a sense of what it is to live there and you know, get my head around the problem, which is
Mhm.
enormous. So everyone had every story had challenges like that.
Your story earlier in the talk about obscure objects was so fascinating, though, to have like 3 iterations of the story, and
Yes.
3 iterations actually be published too, and have the story
Yes,
evolve.
yes.
That was fascinating. Yeah. And so speaking of stories, Lori asked, do you have any tips for keeping tension in the story while still trying to write authentically about people and life?
Well, I see writing as and reading as a question and answer process. So, so you write a sentence. The woman walked into the room and everyone turned and looked at her. Okay. Where are they? How many people are there? Why are they turning to look at her? Is she so beautiful? Is she hideous? Is she? So I think the problem with many beginning writers is that they, you know, they give us everything off the top. They lay all the cards down. So what you want to do is like sentence by sentence, let it out, let the string out, let the string out. And so that will create a tension. We want to we're always reading to answer the questions that we have. So if you create a situation where we have questions, we want to read to answer them. And this is why people love crime fiction, you know, because so even, you know, like I like to sit in the evening and watch a bad crime show just because I want to figure out who did it.
Yeah.
And I want to, you know, I'll say to my husband, okay, it's him. I'll tell you why. And you know, am I right? Now I have to watch the end. Am I right? This is the real killer. And so it's all about that, you know, trying to solve it. It's all puzzles, solving puzzles too. Yeah.
But to use that idea, that question and answer form
Yes.
in
Yes.
the form itself, like in your actual
Yes.
lay out a question that leaves some room for,
Yes.
lay out a
Yes.
sentence that leaves some room for a question, answer
Right.
a little bit,
And
drop in
also
another
have
one, and that creates a tension.
Yes, and also ask your character can ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is someone following me?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, right. So then we have then the character has the question. So via the character, we too have questions. So
Yeah,
it's all about questions, answering the question in any kind of writing.
that's good advice. Yeah, thank you. Um, Kat has asked a question saying, are you more of a plotter or a pantster? Or is it a balance for you two? There's a lot of discussion with writers about being a plotter or a pantster.
So pantster being
Writing by
being
the seat of your pants. So
uh
just intuitively, just seeing what happens as you write on the page, or do you plan
I
things in
would
advance?
say it's hard for me to say it that way. So what I
Mm.
do is I write for about 3 to 4 hours a day, which includes lunch and mini tea breaks. And because that's the limit of my concentration. So that's a problem a lot of people um, have is that they feel they can't focus, but then they also try to focus too long because there's a limit uh, to how much it's just too mentally exhausting to do more than that for me. And so every day I start at the beginning. If it's a short story, I start at the beginning. And so I will, if I have a page at the beginning of the 3 hour period, I spend uh, uh, 2.5 hours rewriting what's already there. And at the very end, I move forward and I write about, I don't know, 300 words. That's about it. And the next day I start again and again. Every day I'm just adding to the end. So it's getting more and more polished and I'm discovering more things that are already there. And that's informing what's going to happen next. So it's not by pantser, it's not like I'm just putting anything down. I'm actually, you know, writing. I think of it like the difference between writing across and writing down. So I'm always trying to write down to keep going deeper into what's already there and then go forward a little tiny bit.
Mhm.
So I do that over and over again. And if it's a novel, I do that in sections, because you obviously can't do that for something that's 200 or 300 pages long. Yeah.
The key is to keep moving forward a little bit every
A
day,
little bit,
not
only a
just
little bit.
circling. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. In that same process, when you're, well, maybe you've explained this a bit, when you're doing the editing for your short stories, how do you find the right balance between cutting out too much and leaving enough to give the story character and depth? That
Well,
was Kat asking that question too, and it sounds like your process kind of takes care of
yes.
that.
Yes, and but also I save, I have a file that's next to the file. Everything I cut, I put in the cuts from file. So I don't throw it out because you can cut too much. And then I also save different versions of it. So I have draft 1, and then when I'm going to go back 3 months later and do draft 2, I copy and paste, and I still have draft 1. And then I also have that file that's all the things I've cut. So then it's not painful, like we always imagine that this thing that we can't cut it because it's so brilliant. And so just put it over here. And
Yeah. We have to have the freedom to cut. We have to have the
yes,
freedom to
yes, yes,
create
yeah,
loosely.
yes.
Just on my question following, do you ever go back to the earlier drafts, or do you very often, or do you tend to find that
I've
even though
sometimes
you keep
gone back
everything?
to look for something I cut out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
But
keep everything.
yes, yeah.
Um, Elizabeth wanted to ask you about translations. So I might maybe that's about translating your book. We might need to ask Elizabeth more about what she means there. And there's a comment from Karen who I wanted to pass it on because it's so lovely. I'm a huge fan of Caroline's work. Thank you for this event. So lovely to be in her company tonight.
Thank you.
And a
Thank you
lovely
so
red
much,
heart. So
Karen.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a couple more coming in. Do you work on one project at a time? That's a good question.
Yes, I do. I do until I get to, to the end of a draft of something, and then I put it away and then I work on something else, and I kind of cycle through. I like to leave a lot of time between drafts so that when I go back, I look at it as if I didn't even write it. And it's much, much easier to see the problems. So that's another way that actually novels are harder than short stories you can't just say I'm going to put it away for 2 years until I forget about it and write a whole nother novel. Yeah, it's hard to do that. Yeah, in fact, I'm trying to do that now. I've decided I'm only writing short novels specifically so I could try to write them that way. Write a novel, put it away, write another novel, put it away, and see if I
Just
could
kind
get
of,
same feel.
yeah, get back and forth. Because you brought up the novel and you're talking about the stories, I'm going to just slip in one of my questions before we wrap up. I'll turn it back over to Claire after. Because you were talking about short stories and novels being very different beasts, and I would agree that they're very different forms. And I loved your description about a dramatic form and a poetic form. That helped to clarify. I learned so much about short stories tonight. But you mentioned how important it was to have a moment of change in a short story. And I would argue that that's also true for the novel, that it's about
Oh,
change.
definitely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
could you just talk about if in your perspective, there's a difference between that change in a novel versus a short story?
Yeah, I would say in a short story, it could be a much smaller change, and it could be an internal change. It could be like just a change of mind. You just change of philosophy. It could be a small thing like that. Whereas with a novel, it's more incremental changes, causally connected. So something happens and the character changes a bit, and they learn something, they feel differently, and then that makes them do something that they wouldn't have done before, and now something happens as a result of that, and so you get this kind of chain all the way up the rising conflict until you have your big the climax of the story would be the culmination of all the small changes to the big change.
Yeah.
That's
Okay, so a bigger change preceded by smaller ones.
Yes.
Okay, and the short story is smaller.
It can be have just one little thing. It can be
Yeah,
like
look, a shift almost, like a
Yes.
nuance. Claire had mentioned
Yes.
earlier that sometimes
Yes.
shame can be very nuanced. Elizabeth has a question for you. Would you resurrect Ellen in a prequel, perhaps?
No, no,
Okay.
no. Oh, thank you though. I miss her so much. Yeah, I really loved writing about her. I thought she was, yeah, she felt so real to me. And but
Yeah.
you know, I feel like you get to the end of something and there's so many other things I want to write. You know, I'll never be able to write all the things I have in my mind. So so I won't. But
Yeah.
I just hope that people continue to read the book or find the book,
Yeah.
and she's always there. She's always there for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Claire. I'll just step back and let you and Caroline wrap up your conversation and
Okay, thank you for carrying those questions. Those are good questions, everybody.
Yes, thank you everyone for those great questions.
Yeah. And thank you, Caroline. This was a wonderful interview. Thank you for your time and everything. We really appreciated that. And you're teaching up at SFU. I don't know if anyone's in Vancouver, if there's an option there for them to, is that with the
It's in
adult?
the writing and publishing program. So it's just a class that runs twice a year. Starts again in September. It's usually January and September. It's 12 weeks, every second week, um, for 4 hours. So I love teaching. It's a great class. It's a
And,
techniques class, so it's a little different. We don't workshop. We we do writing in the class, and it's a tech. I talk about technique, and we practice different technical things with fiction. Yeah.
oh, that's awesome. And is it a credit class or can it just sort of be, can you,
It's a non-credit. Yeah.
credit? Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And is it online or just you have to be in
No,
person?
just in person. Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone in Vancouver, you'd be fortunate to be able to take that. That would be great. Yeah, so thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. We'll send out the recording. Caroline, you had a prompt for us. Maybe we can put that in.
Sure, sure. Well, I had a couple of things really quickly because I think we're out of time. So one thing, this is a style prompt. It's something I do mention in my SFU class. So, and it ties into what we're talking about learning from other writers. So you know, to try to, you know, think more conscientiously about style. So to find a piece of writing, say just a paragraph, not long, that of a writer you admire, maybe a particular passage you admire, and to type it out so that you feel in your body what it is to actually write those words,
Right.
and then to try to rewrite it using precisely the same formula. So I'm just going to give you really quickly an example. This
Okay.
is a paragraph. It's 3 words from Monroe. He tried looking out the window, but the scene, composed of the same elements, had changed. Less than 100 miles on, it seemed as if there was a warmer climate. The lakes were fringed with ice, not covered. The black water, black rocks under the wintry clouds, filled the air with darkness. So now I am writing this, taking exactly the same, putting the same type of speech
Mhm.
and trying to have the same, absolute same feeling, but a different thing. So now I've changed the situation. He tried using the emergency exit, but the stairwell, forming an obdurate shaft, unnerved him. After only a few exhausting flights, it seemed as if there was a sinister plan underway. The cement was laced with cracks, not smooth. The gray paint, gray risers under the ashen ceiling deepened the sense of gloom.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it has the same rhythm,
Same rhythm, same.
same
So
structure
yes,
of
so I actually have a book where I write down when I'm reading, and I have sentences that I admire. I
Mhm.
write the sentences down that I admire, and when I kind of get stuck with my
Yeah.
own flow, I read the sentences that have inspired me. So that's a really great thing to do and get you going.
That is amazing exercise. Maybe we'll talk, maybe you can cut and paste that for me, if I can
Sure. Yeah.
include it in the follow-up. I'll include that in the follow-up email
Sure.
to everybody,
Great. Good.
along with the tape, thing, and we'll have it up on YouTube. April and I are going to be starting a little YouTube channel. We'll get all these interviews up that we've both been doing, so that everybody can see them. Yeah. So thank you again. Thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for
Thank
coming,
you, everybody.
and we will, yeah, we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.